My BIL borrowed $10,000 from us for emergency expenses. He said, I'll pay you back right away. I found out he was taking lavish vacations, so I showed up at his office and announced his debt to his boss. He paid up. Let me start by saying I've always believed in helping family when they're in need. But what do you do when the family member you try to help takes advantage of your kindness? That's what happened to me, and it's still blowing my mind that this even happened. For context, my name is Beatrice, but most people just call me B. I've been married to my husband Clark for nearly 2 decades, and while our marriage is strong, his brother Marlon has always been a source of tension. Marlon is one of those people who's charming when he needs to be but has zero follow-through on anything else. He's in his early 40s, single, and has always been figuring things out. Clark has always felt protective of him, probably because their parents passed away when they were young, leaving Clark as the de facto older brother-turned-parent figure. I've tried to be understanding, but Marlon has tested my patience more times than I can count. 6 months ago, we got a late-night call from Marlon. It was about 11 p.m., and I was already in bed when Clark answered. I could hear Marlon's voice through the phone, frantic and panicked. I couldn't make out everything he was saying, but I caught words like emergency, money, and I'm screwed. Clark put him on speakerphone, and Marlon launched into this whole dramatic story. He said he was in deep financial trouble. According to him, he was behind on rent, his car was about to get repossessed, and his utilities were on the verge of being shut off. He claimed he had no one else to turn to and that he needed $10,000 immediately to avoid total disaster. He was practically begging, saying things like, I swear I'll pay you back right away, and this is just to get me back on my feet. He even promised to set up a payment plan with us if that made us feel better. Now, $10,000 is a lot of money. Clark and I aren't rolling in cash, we're comfortable, but we work hard for every penny. Clark teaches middle school, and I run a small bakery that's just starting to break even after years of grinding. We've got 2 kids to support, and like most families, we have bills, a mortgage, and unexpected expenses popping up all the time. But Marlon sounded desperate, and Clark was clearly worried about him. I could see it in his face, he wanted to help. I'll admit, I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Marlon had a history of being irresponsible with money. He'd borrowed small amounts from us before, $50 here, $100 there, and never paid it back. But Clark was adamant. He's my brother, he said. If we don't help him, who will? So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The next morning, we transferred $10,000 to Marlon's account. I remember feeling uneasy about it, but I told myself it was the right thing to do. Marlon swore up and down that he'd pay us back, within a couple of months, tops. I wanted to believe him. I really did. For the first few weeks, I tried to be patient. I figured he needed time to get his finances in order. But then I started noticing something strange. Marlon's social media, which was usually pretty quiet, suddenly became very active. At first, it was little things, pictures of him out at fancy restaurants or at a bar with friends. Nothing too crazy, but it made me raise an eyebrow. Then, about a month after we gave him the money, he posted a picture of himself on a beach. At first, I thought, this has to be an old photo. But the caption said, living my best life in Cancun. I was stunned. Cancun? The guy who was supposedly on the verge of eviction was now sipping margaritas by the ocean? I showed the post to Clark, and even he looked uncomfortable. Maybe someone else paid for the trip, he said, trying to give Marlon the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't convinced. Over the next few weeks, more photos popped up. Vegas. Miami. A cruise to the Bahamas. It was one extravagant trip after another. He was tagging himself at high-end restaurants, poolside cabanas, and luxury spas. He looked like he was living a life most people can only dream of. Meanwhile, Clark and I were at home, working our butts off, and not a single dollar had been repaid. I decided I needed answers. Clark wanted to give Marlon more time, but I couldn't ignore the obvious anymore. We invited Marlon over for dinner under the guise of catching up. I made lasagna, his favorite, and tried to keep things light at first. After dinner, Clark brought up the loan. Hey, Marlon, he said, I just wanted to check in on that money we lent you. Any update on when you might be able to start paying us back? Marlon didn't even flinch. He smiled and said, oh, yeah, about that. Things have been a little tight, but I'm working on it. I'll get it to you soon. He said it so casually, like he was talking about borrowing a lawnmower, not $10,000. That was it for me. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Tight? I snapped. You've been tight, but you've somehow managed to take 3 vacations in the past 2 months? Marlon froze. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. He stammered something about a friend inviting him on the trips and how they were all expenses paid. I wasn't buying it. Clark looked like he wanted to believe him, but even he was struggling to keep his cool. Marlon left shortly after that, promising again to get us the money soon. But weeks passed, and nothing changed. No payments, no communication, just more social media posts of him living the high life. By this point, I was furious. Clark was still holding out hope that Marlon would do the right thing, but I knew better. I told Clark, if you won't do something about this, I will. Clark begged me not to cause a scene, but I was done playing nice. If Marlon thought he could take advantage of us and face no consequences, he had another thing coming. After weeks of nothing, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. I knew Marlon worked at a big marketing firm in Albany, and he was always bragging about how he was one of their top account managers. He made it sound like he was the golden child of the office, someone they couldn't live without. I figured if Marlon wasn't going to pay us back willingly, I'd make it so uncomfortable for him that he'd have no choice. I didn't tell Clark what I was planning. He would have tried to talk me out of it, and frankly, I didn't need the guilt trip. I pulled up Marlon's social media and started printing screenshots of every single vacation photo he'd posted since we gave him the $10,000. Cancun, Vegas, Miami, the cruise, everything. I also printed out the texts where he begged for money, claimed it was an emergency, and promised to pay us back immediately. I put everything in a neat little folder, got dressed in my best business casual outfit, and drove to Albany. When I got to his office building, I walked right in like I owned the place. The receptionist looked up and smiled, probably thinking I was a client or someone important. "Hi," I said sweetly. "I'm here to see Marlon. It's a personal matter, but it's urgent." She hesitated for a second but then paged him. A few minutes later, Marlon came out, looking completely confused. As soon as he saw me, his face turned bright red. "B? What are you doing here?" he said, glancing nervously around the lobby. I smiled. "Oh, I just wanted to talk to you about that $10,000 you owe us." He grabbed my arm and tried to steer me toward the exit. "Not here," he hissed under his breath. "We'll talk later." But I wasn't about to be brushed off. I yanked my arm away and raised my voice just enough for the people nearby to hear. "No, Marlon, I think this is the perfect place to talk about it. After all, you've had months to pay us back, but instead, you've been taking luxury vacations and pretending everything's fine." By now, people were staring. Marlon looked like he was about to have a meltdown. "B, please," he whispered. "Don't do this." "Oh, I'm doing this," I said, pulling out the folder. "In fact, I think your boss might want to know what kind of person you really are." That's when a man in a suit, who I guessed was Marlon's boss, walked over. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking between me and Marlon. I smiled at him. "No problem at all. I just thought you should know that one of your top employees borrowed $10,000 from his brother and me for an emergency, and has been using it to fund his vacations instead of paying us back." Marlon started stammering something about how I was misunderstanding the situation, but I wasn't done. I handed the boss the folder and said, "Everything you need to know is in here. Texts, screenshots, the works. You might want to think twice about trusting someone who lies and steals from his own family." The boss didn't say much, but he gave Marlon a cold, hard look before walking away with the folder. Marlon, on the other hand, looked like he was about to faint. He begged me to leave, but I told him I wasn't going anywhere until I got my money. At that point, the receptionist was openly staring, and a few other employees were whispering to each other. It was clear Marlon's golden reputation was crumbling right before his eyes. I left shortly after that, feeling both proud of myself and absolutely furious that it had come to this. I didn't care if Marlon was embarrassed, he deserved it. That night, Marlon called Clark. He was livid, saying I'd humiliated him and jeopardized his career. Clark tried to calm him down, but I grabbed the phone and said, "You humiliated yourself, Marlon. All I did was shine a light on the mess you created. If you don't want people knowing what kind of person you are, maybe don't act like a scumbag." The next morning, $10,000 magically appeared in our bank account. I don't know where Marlon got the money, whether he borrowed it from someone else, drained his savings, or sold his soul, but I didn't care. We had our money back, and that was all that mattered. But the story doesn't end there. A few weeks later, we heard through the grapevine that Marlon had been demoted at work. Apparently, his boss didn't take too kindly to finding out that Marlon had lied about his finances and used someone else's money to fund his lavish lifestyle. I don't know if he'll ever fully recover from that, professionally or personally, but I can't say I feel bad for him. As for Clark and me, we've decided that Marlon is officially cut off. No more loans, no more help, no more second chances. Clark was upset with me at first for going to Marlon's office, but even he admitted that Marlon had it coming. We haven't spoken to Marlon since, and honestly, I'm fine with that. If he ever wants to be part of our lives again, he's got a lot of making up to do. In the end, I learned a hard lesson about family and boundaries. Sometimes, the people you think you can trust the most are the ones who will take advantage of you. And when that happens, you have to stand up for yourself, even if it means burning a few bridges along the way. Do I regret what I did? Not for a second. Marlon got exactly what he deserved, and Clark and I got our money back. That's what I call a win.